Do you feel it inside? This burning restlessness, this sensitivity that isn't just sensitivity, this connection that seems to consume your soul? You're not here by chance. Perhaps the mere whisper of the word empath has awakened something deep, ancient, a restlessness that can't be explained by superficial explanations alone. What I'm about to reveal isn't a spiritual fairy tale, nor a shallow definition of sensitive person. It's the raw, primordial truth about what it means to carry an empath's soul on your back, a living channel, a portal through which pains that aren't even yours pass, shadows that lurk silently and threaten to devour those who haven't yet learned to protect themselves. Empathy isn't a kind gesture. It's not just feeling what another person feels. It's a weight, a psychic burden, a deep connection to the collective unconscious, that immense and mysterious network that connects all of humanity. You are, in essence, a psychic receiver, an ancient healer who sometimes vomits the world's suffering because you carry pains not meant for you. And this is no simple gift. It's a double-edged sword that can hurt more than it heals. Imagine the village healer, kneeling in the field, his body transmuting the land's illness, not because he is ill, but because he is the channel. This is what the empath is like, an involuntary transmuter of other people's shadows. Without awareness of this role, the soul is lost, the psyche fragments, and darkness devours. You may feel like a sponge that doesn't know how to squeeze itself, an open vessel without the wisdom to contain the fire. The unconscious, this sacred and chaotic cauldron, has no morals, no limits. It flows, and if you don't learn to control the flow, you will be consumed. I've seen, in dreams, images that speak this hidden language. An eyeless woman, on a bridge over an abyss, her hands trembling between a plea for help and a defense against the silent screams emanating from the void. She feels each of them, but doesn't know where the other ends and she begins. This is the symbol of the empath, the one who carries voices and pains that don't belong to them and gets lost in the sea of other people's shadows. If you're an empath, you need to understand that your empathy goes far beyond superficial feelings. You're connected to the archetypal forces that move not only individuals, but entire generations and collectives. You sense the ancestral line, the untold stories, the forgotten gods. And without deep self-connection, this avalanche can overwhelm you. Beware the romanticization of sensitivity that popular culture promotes. True empathy summons the shadow to the surface with brutal force. Unexpressed anger, ancestral pain, buried trauma, all of this surges within the empath, inflaming their body and mind. Many who cry for no apparent reason carry more than their own sadness. They embrace the pain of entire lineages, silence stories that cry out to be seen. But there is a way out. The path of the conscious empath begins when you learn to name the shadows you carry, to distinguish what is yours from what belongs to others, to return what is not yours. This is not easy. It is profound alchemy, the transformation of martyr into master, of sponge into sacred vessel. It is learning to say, I feel you, but I do not become you. I see your wound, but I do not harbor it. It is being a healer with limits, a mystic with firm roots, who does not bleed for others. This is the destiny of the awakened empath, not to be a victim of their own gifts, but a luminous and integral presence. One who carries themselves so strongly that they remind the world how to carry themselves. And to get here, it takes courage. Courage to descend into the inner caverns, dialogue with one's own anger, one's own sadness, and recognize the dark pleasure that sometimes hides in the identity of the Savior. It's not a path for the weak. It's an initiation. A constant vigil to discern whether what you feel is yours or someone else's, whether you're helping or controlling, whether you're present or performing. The conscious empath isn't afraid of uncertainty. They know that sometimes silence is the medicine, that someone else's pain can be a doorway, not an enemy. Relationships transform. The unconscious empath is drawn to the chaotic, the wounded, because they seek to prove their worth by enduring pain. The conscious empath craves clarity, seeks connections that see them as whole, not as an emotional regulator. And when loneliness appears, they don't rush to fill it with ghosts. They sit with it, listen, and allow the silence to speak. You, who heard these words, are on the threshold of this transformation. The voice you hear now carries the promise that it is possible not to succumb to the weight of other people's shadows, but to transform them into light. Your story can be one of suffering, but also of wisdom. You can be the mirror that reveals not pain, but the hidden potential within every soul. I invite you to begin this inner revolution now. Share in the comments how you feel this profound connection, How your empathy touches not only what's around you, but also what pulses, invisible and ancient, within you. Like this video so that more sensitive souls can awaken to their true nature, not as victims, but as alchemists of the unconscious. And subscribe to continue this transformative journey. Because being an empath is a gift, but being a conscious empath is a sacred calling. You are not alone. This is just the beginning of the journey to becoming not a sponge that absorbs, but a vessel that illuminates. Have you ever felt like you were carrying the weight of the entire world, even without knowing where it comes from? As if the pain, fear, and suffering of those around you were lodged within you, silently eroding your balance? This isn't an uncommon sensation for those with the gift, or perhaps the curse, of being an empath. But what few understand is that this burden isn't just emotional. It's archetypal, ancestral, and psychic. It's a call to a journey that goes far beyond what meets the eye. The empath's soul is fertile ground for the deepest archetypes, those primordial images that inhabit the collective unconscious and shape our human experience. And when you're not aware of these forces, they dominate you, making you lose yourself in dark, unmapped labyrinths. You become an open vessel, a channel through which pains that were never yours pass, unhealed wounds, ancestral memories, collective shadows seeking a home. And without the clarity to discern what belongs to you and what belongs to others, the risk of sinking is real and constant. Think of the empath as someone alien to their own body, like that ancient healer who unwittingly absorbs the disease of the earth, feels the community's fever in their gut, but doesn't know where their pain ends and the pain of others begins. You feel the energy of the environment, sense what others hide, sense what the world doesn't want you to feel, and that's where the challenge begins. How to deal with this avalanche of feelings and energies without losing yourself. Carl Jung talked a lot about the shadow, that part of ourselves we reject, fear, and hide. But for the empath, the shadow has another dimension. It's not just their own, but also the sum of the unacknowledged shadows of others. And when this collective shadow isn't integrated, it becomes a shadow that haunts you, confuses you, and can even consume you. This is why many empaths feel exhausted, anxious, and sometimes depressed, without understanding exactly why. They're carrying ghosts that aren't theirs. And here comes the first step to liberation: awareness. The awareness that you are not alone within yourself, that there is a multiplicity of voices, of energies, that need to be seen, named, and separated. It is a work of inner alchemy, transforming what is shadow into light, what is chaos into order, what is pain into wisdom. It's not an easy path. It requires courage to look within and face the dark parts you may never have wanted to acknowledge. It requires discipline to create boundaries, to learn to squeeze the sponge, to establish invisible barriers that protect your energy. And it requires humility to accept that not everything can be healed at once, that the journey is made up of small steps, setbacks, and trial and error. I know it can feel lonely. That, often, the world doesn't understand your deep sensitivity, your invisible burden. But you are not alone. There are others walking the same path, seeking the same light at the end of the psychic tunnel. And that's why this invitation I extend to you now is so important. Sign up to continue this journey of self-discovery, to receive support, to share experiences, to grow together. The empath's journey isn't just about feeling the world, but about learning to feel whole within it. It's about transforming this sensitivity, which can be a prison, into a source of power and wisdom. When you begin to recognize yourself as this living channel, but also as a being with limits and autonomy, the darkness begins to lose its power. And it is in this movement that you find true freedom. Not the freedom to avoid pain, but the freedom to choose what to absorb, what to transform, what to release. It is the path of individuation, the call to be whole, to be yourself, not a mirror of others' suffering, but a conscious and steadfast presence. So, if you feel that this message touches your heart, that this journey resonates within you, don't hesitate to sign up to continue learning about this deep and fascinating world of empaths. Because only in the light of consciousness can we begin to dissolve the darkness that surrounds us and, most importantly, that we carry within. Let us walk this journey together, not as victims of sensitivity, but as alchemists of the soul, transforming darkness into light, heaviness into wings. Once you understand the invisible weight you carry as an empath, a new question begins to emerge, perhaps even more disturbing. Who are you behind this intense sensitivity? How many times have you felt the need to hide your true self to protect your heart, to avoid pain or judgment? How many times have you donned masks that disguise your true feelings to fit into a world unprepared for your depth? The persona, this social mask we all wear, is a survival tool. For the empath, however, this mask can become a prison. Behind it, the empath hides not only vulnerability but also the fear of being consumed by the energies they absorb. They create a shield, a facade that they often don't even recognize, a character they play to navigate everyday life. But the more they identify with this persona, the further away they become from themselves. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming a whole and authentic being, requires the courage to shed these masks. It's a dive into the inner labyrinth where wounds, pain, and the truth of the soul reside. For the empath, this journey is even deeper and more complex, because the labyrinth is made not only of their own shadows, but also of the shadows of others, embedded in their psyche. Imagine a scenario. You're in a theater, on stage, under intense spotlights, playing a role everyone expects of you. But behind the scenes, your true self silently watches, yearning to break free. This disconnect causes an almost unbearable internal tension. You feel like you're living someone else's life, that your essence is imprisoned behind heavy curtains of expectations, obligations, and old wounds that have never healed. This disconnection doesn't go unnoticed by the body and mind. It manifests itself in silent symptoms: constant fatigue, unexplained anxiety, a feeling of emptiness even when everything seems to be in place. The empath begins to question whether the life they're living is truly theirs or a reflection of what's expected of them. This was the case with Anna, a woman who seemed to have it all: professional success, family, friends. But deep inside, she felt a sadness she couldn't name. Gradually, as she began her journey of self-discovery, Anna realized that much of her life had been an effort to please, to shield her sensitivity from the world. She wore masks, those of strength, joy, neutrality, to avoid being consumed by the emotional waves she felt. When she began to shed these masks, a whole universe within her opened up. It wasn't easier, but it was real. Empath authenticity is a delicate and painful process. It's not simply letting the masks fall. It's learning to build an identity that integrates all parts: light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, self and other. This integration allows the empath to experience their sensitivity without fear, without the need to hide or run away. But authenticity isn't a destination. It's a constant movement. Each day, you're invited to choose: which mask do you keep? Which do you remove? And, most importantly, how do you learn to love and embrace yourself without the protection of these facades? Jung reminds us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you really are. For the empath, this privilege is even more sacred, as the journey to this who involves encountering shadows that have often been projected onto them by generations, groups, and the collective unconscious. Recognizing this is the first step toward freeing oneself from the illusion of the persona and beginning to build a true identity, one that embraces suffering without being defined by it. Because the empath's true strength lies not in the ability to absorb the world's pain, but in the ability to remain whole in the midst of it. Vulnerability, in this sense, is not weakness, but courage. Courage to be seen, to be felt, to be yourself, in all your complexity and beauty. This is the essence of individuation for the empath. Being simultaneously the healer and the patient, the receiver and the guardian, the mirror and the light. And in doing so, you not only transform your own life but also shine a beacon for others also seeking to free themselves from the shadows they carry. It is a call to strip yourself of what is not yours, to dare to be imperfect, to embrace the mystery of being a sensitive and strong being, whole and alive. This path, though tortuous, is where true freedom lies, the freedom to be yourself, without masks, without fear, without escape. After recognizing the masks you wore to survive and the silent pain you carried in doing so, a new challenge arises for the empath. How to manage your own energy in a world that constantly offers more shadows than light. How to protect yourself from the invisible currents that try to pull your spirit down, without losing the sensitivity that makes you so deeply human. This is a question few dare to confront, but one that often defines the fine line between balance and collapse. As an empath, you've probably experienced that suffocating feeling of entering a heavy environment, even without knowing why. Or of hearing a seemingly simple comment and suddenly feeling invaded by a sadness or anger that seems not to belong to you. This invasion isn't imaginary, it's real, and it happens because your energetic field is open to receiving what many prefer to ignore. The question remains: how long will you allow this limitless invasion? How long will you continue absorbing what isn't yours, carrying other people's burdens, suffocating your own soul in the name of compassion? Carl Jung spoke of the need for individuation, the process of becoming a whole being, capable of differentiating oneself and protecting oneself from external factors. For the empath, this individuation is also a subtle art of creating energetic membranes, not rigid walls that isolate, but fluid barriers that filter, letting in what serves and rejecting what might contaminate. This membrane is like a psychic skin that must be carefully strengthened, because it not only protects but also maintains the essential connection with the world, allowing the empath to experience their sensitivity without being crushed by it. Think of the empath as a sponge made of light and shadow. If this sponge isn't periodically squeezed, washed, and purified, it becomes saturated, heavy, and inevitably breaks. And it's at this point that many lose control. They sink into inexplicable anguish, mental and physical illness, a wear and tear that seems to have no external cause. The empath's body and soul scream for cleansing, for respite, for a return to their essence. You may find yourself exhausted without knowing why, anxious for no apparent reason, feeling an emptiness that nothing fills, because you're carrying pain that isn't yours. Imagine the figure of the shaman who, after performing their spiritual work, retreats for a moment of purification, a bath, a meditation, a ritual to expel what has been absorbed but no longer belongs to them. This practice is not a luxury, it is a vital necessity. The conscious empath learns that caring for themselves is as important as caring for others, that without this balance, their own flame risks extinguishing. Without this constant cleansing, the energy you absorb from the world becomes a toxin that contaminates your being, impedes your growth, and corrodes your physical and mental health. There is also the risk of energetic fusion, when the empath cannot discern where the other ends and themselves begin. This fusion creates a dangerous field, where the pain of others is not only felt but absorbed, internalized, becoming part of their own suffering. Jung called this psychic possession, a condition in which the other's unconscious dominates their own. And this possession, if not recognized and confronted, can lead to collapse. The empath, without realizing it, can become an extension of others' suffering, carrying a burden impossible to bear alone. You must ask yourself, how can we create this porous membrane that protects us without closing our hearts? How can we feel the world without losing ourselves in it? How can we offer our presence without becoming a repository for others' suffering? These questions are essential because the path to conscious empathy involves building an inner fortress, not made of isolating walls, but of clear, supportive boundaries. The answers aren't simple, but they begin with awareness. The ability to name what's coming at you and decide what to embrace and what to let pass. You need to learn to disconnect, to draw your energy inward, to set boundaries that aren't cold walls, but loving gestures of self-care. It's a daily learning process, a practice that improves over time, requiring patience and determination. It's this balance that makes the difference between the drowning empath and the one who sails steadily. Between the empath who gets lost and the one who finds themselves. Because the empath's true strength lies not in the amount of pain they can carry, but in the wisdom of when and how to carry it. It's learning to say no to that which threatens their integrity, without fear of rejection or blame. I know this practice requires patience and discipline. It demands moments of deep silence, contemplation, and detachment. But it is precisely there that a previously unimaginable freedom arises. The freedom to be whole, without fear of feeling, without the need to sacrifice. It is discovering that your sensitivity need not be a burden, but can be an inexhaustible source of conscious compassion, of true presence. And if this message touches your heart, if it makes you reflect on the importance of self-care on this intense journey, leave a like. Because sharing this light helps more people understand that being an empath isn't a sentence, but an invitation to self-knowledge and healing. Like so, this conversation can reach those still lost in the shadows of unconscious empathy. Stay with me. The next part of this journey reveals how you can transform pain into wisdom and walk with a strong soul, even through the darkest nights. Because the empath is not just a receiver, they are alchemists of their own life, and this alchemy begins with the deep care of their vital energy. As you progress in understanding your role as an empath, an invisible yet powerful shadow may begin to reveal itself, the seduction of others' pain. It's a delicate trap, a silent plot in which the empath, driven by deep compassion, begins to merge with the suffering they absorb. This fusion can be as subtle as it is devastating, because, deep down, you're not just feeling what the other feels, you begin to become part of that pain, living it as if it were your own. This dynamic, which may seem like an act of love, actually has deep and ancient roots within the human psyche. Carl Jung spoke of the wounded healer complex, the archetype that describes the healer who, in trying to heal others, ends up perpetuating their own wounds, losing themselves in endless cycles of suffering. The empath can fall into this trap without realizing it. In trying to save others, they end up losing themselves. The one who should be the light in the darkness becomes hostage to their own compassion, confusing the need to help with a compulsion that drains their energy, their health, their soul. Have you ever felt that insatiable urge to care for someone, to mend a wound that seems never to heal? Or that desire to delve so deeply into another's pain that, in the end, you no longer know where the other ends and you begin? This is the dark side of empathy. The real risk of becoming a slave to another's suffering, losing the thread of your own identity. This seduction of pain has deep roots in the psyche and is often fueled by personal wounds that the empath has not yet integrated. Empaths often carry old traumas, unhealed pain, and parts of themselves they haven't yet had the courage to face. Unconsciously, they seek to confirm their existence, their worth, through the suffering they endure. It's a way of being alive, even if through pain. Pain becomes a bond, a reason to stay present, a false sense of purpose, an invisible prison. But this painful connection doesn't bring relief. On the contrary, it slowly corrodes, darkens the soul, and creates an emotional prison from which it's difficult to escape. The empath feels they must sacrifice themselves, must suffer together, must always be available, because they believe that only then are they loved, recognized, and needed. And in this process, they often forget that the greatest healing begins within themselves. This self-denial is a silent violence that destroys life force and genuine joy. The stories of many empaths I've followed reveal this dark and complex plot. People who, in the name of love and compassion, lost themselves in toxic relationships, drowned in impossible responsibilities, or carried the weight of family dramas for years without clear boundaries. They became complicit in their own suffering, believing this was their destiny or their sacred calling. But Jung reminds us that the true healer is not the one who bleeds incessantly on the altar of another, but the one who knows their own shadow, who integrates their pain without being defined by it, who finds balance between giving and receiving. The conscious empath learns to say no, not as a cold rejection, but as an act of self-love, a gesture of protection for their soul and psychic integrity. This ability to set boundaries isn't simple. It involves facing deep fears, the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, the fear of being seen as selfish or insensitive. But it's an essential step toward breaking the cycle of emotional codependency that imprisons so many unconscious empaths. By regaining emotional autonomy, the empath ceases to be a mere vessel and becomes a sacred vessel, one who welcomes without drowning, who loves without losing self, who offers presence without carrying the weight of the world. This transformation not only saves the empath, but allows them to offer truer, more sustainable love to others. Because the love that comes from healing and self-compassion is free, not possessive. It's strong, not dependent. It's a light that doesn't burn, but warms. Therefore, understanding this seduction of pain is fundamental for any empath who wishes to live with integrity and emotional health. It takes courage to examine one's own motivations, to recognize the patterns that hold one back, and to free oneself from them with compassion and determination. It is necessary to take responsibility for not being a victim of one's own gift, but its master. This is an invitation for you to see empathy not as an inevitable burden, but as a powerful tool for transformation, when used with awareness and self-respect. This way, you don't lose yourself in others, but find yourself. You don't become a martyr, but a mystic. You don't carry the world's suffering, but rather light the flame of healing. The empath's true mastery lies in transforming the seduction of pain into living wisdom, in the alchemy that transforms suffering into light, loss into gain, shadow into clarity. This is the journey few have the courage to embark on, but it leads to the deepest awakening, the awakening to one's own healing power and to the love that begins within. After recognizing the seduction of pain and the danger of losing yourself in the suffering of others, you begin to prepare for an even deeper and more challenging journey, an encounter with your own shadow. This part of you that has been repressed, denied, and pushed into the subterranean realm of consciousness. For the empath, this delve is essential, because only by integrating your own shadow can you truly free yourself from the compulsive absorption of others' suffering. The shadow is that hidden part of the self that contains everything we reject, the fears, the anger, the insecurities, the pain we don't even want to admit to ourselves. Jung said that the shadow doesn't disappear, it simply hides until the moment we come face to face with it. And for the empath, who already carries so many other people's ghosts, Distinguishing their shadow from the collective shadow is an act of supreme courage. The unconscious empath often projects this shadow onto others, seeing in the world what they cannot accept in themselves. But when the gaze turns inward, transformation begins. Facing the shadow isn't about sinking into darkness, but about illuminating the forgotten parts so they can be integrated and transformed. It is in this process that the empath discovers their own repressed desires, the personal wounds that may have been masked by their role as caregiver. They realize that part of the suffering they carried stemmed from not being allowed to feel their own anger, sadness, or fear. They often maintained a tireless giving posture to avoid addressing their own needs. This recognition is both liberating and painful. Liberating because it allows for an encounter with authenticity. Painful because it's a direct confrontation with what you fear most within yourself. But it's a necessary step to break the invisible chains that imprison the empath in the role of victim or martyr. By descending into this inner underworld, the empath begins to realize they are not alone. That the shadow is a common territory for all human beings, but it must be navigated with care and respect. The empath learns to embrace their shadow with compassion, without judgment, as an integral part of their being, worthy of love and attention. This process of integration is the true alchemy of empathy. The empath ceases to be a passive channel of pain and becomes an active agent of transformation. They begin to discern what is theirs and what is not, what needs to be healed and what needs to be returned to the universe. They begin to establish internal boundaries that protect them without isolating them, creating a sacred space where they can experience their sensitivity without being consumed. It is at this point that empathy ceases to be a burden and becomes a conscious gift. The awakened empath doesn't fear their own shadow or the shadows of others. They see it as part of the fabric of existence, something to be respected and worked with, but without losing sight of it. They know that to be light, they must first walk through the darkness, understand their own fears and pain, and thus be able to illuminate the path without being extinguished. This journey requires patience, courage, and brutal honesty. Empaths may often feel tempted to run away, seeking refuge in distractions, superficial relationships, or social masks. But true freedom only emerges when one chooses to remain, look within, and embrace one's wholeness. Jung stated that, "We are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become." This choice is daily and requires a commitment to truth, authenticity, and self-love. For the empath, this is the greatest task of all, reconciling with oneself so that one can finally live fully. Thus, the empath learns that the shadow is not an enemy, but an ally. That hidden forces reside within it, which, once integrated, expand their capacity to love without losing themselves. That true healing begins when the gaze stops seeking outside and turns inward, to their own heart. The path of the shadow is the path of authenticity. It is the road that leads from unconscious suffering to conscious wisdom, from dispersion to centering, from loss to reunion. And it is on this road that the empath finds themselves, not as someone who suffers for others, but as a whole, strong being, capable of giving without self-effacement. It is in this place of balance that the true power of empathy resides. Not an empathy that consumes, but an empathy that liberates, transforms, and heals. When empaths begin to integrate their own shadow and build the inner boundaries that protect them, they encounter a new, essential discovery: the power of the space between stimulus and response. It is in this invisible, subtle, yet infinitely powerful gap that true emotional freedom resides, the place where the empath ceases to be a puppet of others' emotions and becomes the conscious author of their own life. This space is a kind of sacred pause, a breach where automatism can be broken. For the empath, who has sometimes felt overwhelmed by the whirlwind of external and internal emotions, discovering this pause is like finding a safe harbor in the midst of a storm. It is there that they can breathe, observe, feel, and choose their response, instead of simply reacting with an automatic and often destructive reaction. Carl Jung said that, between stimulus and response there is a space. In this space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. For the empath, this phrase is not just a theoretical concept, but a concrete invitation to take control of their sensitivity, to stop being swallowed by impulse and start acting consciously, even when emotions are overwhelming. Imagine an everyday situation. You're in a charged environment, a meeting, a difficult conversation, a tense moment. Someone makes a comment that triggers an immediate reaction of discomfort, anger, sadness, or even fear. The unconscious empath would have already absorbed that energy, confused it with their own feelings, and reacted impulsively, perhaps with an outburst, a harsh silence, or an emotional withdrawal. But by learning to create this space, you allow the emotion to arrive, to be felt in your body and mind, but don't allow it to dominate your mind or actions. You take a deep breath, observe what's happening within you, recognize the triggers that triggered the emotion, and choose a response that honors your integrity and values. This practice requires practice and patience. It's not easy to break old patterns of reaction, especially when one lives immersed in the intensity of emotions, a state that can seem chaotic and inevitable. But with each conscious pause, the empath strengthens their emotional autonomy, expands their ability to be present without losing themselves, and develops a sense of inner power that nothing and no one can take away. This skill also has a profound impact on interpersonal relationships. By creating this space for choice, empaths stop reacting automatically to others' projections, judgments, and dramas, avoiding unnecessary conflict and promoting clearer, more compassionate, and calm communication. They learn to respond with genuine empathy, one that respects their own limits and those of others, rather than with a reaction that fuels toxic cycles of mutual suffering. And it's important to understand that this pause isn't a form of denial, repression, or escape from emotion. On the contrary, it's an act of profound recognition, feeling the emotion, embracing it, but not blindly identifying with it. It's a way of giving voice to what's inside, without letting it control your actions or your life. It's the balance between feeling and acting, between receptivity and protection. Furthermore, this space between stimulus and response is also where the empath can dialogue with their own shadow. It's there that the opportunity arises to question emotional automatisms, understand the origins of triggers, and transform pain into learning and growth. In this silence, the empath listens to their inner voice, recognizes their patterns, and consciously chooses their path, instead of getting lost in impulsive reactions. The empath who masters this space experiences a completely different quality of life. They are no longer dominated by emotional ups and downs, but develop an inner stability that strengthens them in the face of everyday challenges. They become a beacon of calm amidst chaos, a living example that it is possible to feel deeply without being destroyed. They walk through life with a presence that is non-invasive, yet calms and strengthens those around them. If this reflection resonates with you, I invite you to share your experiences with this pause between stimulus and response in the comments. How have you found this space? What challenges do you face in practicing it? Your story could be the light someone needs to begin this transformation. By sharing your experiences, you not only strengthen yourself but also strengthen the community of empaths on this journey of self-discovery. Remember, power isn't in controlling emotions, but in consciously choosing how to respond to them. And that choice begins in silence, in that space between what happens to us and who we choose to be. When the empath begins to master the space between stimulus and response, a new challenge emerges on the horizon of self-knowledge, the art of separation. Not a cold, distant, or inhuman separation, but a sacred distancing, an invisible line that protects without excluding, that respects without suffocating. For the empath, this skill is essential, because often the greatest danger lies not outside, but within, in the almost instinctive tendency to merge, to lose oneself in the other, to dissolve into one's pain, fears, and shadows. Fusion is one of the most insidious and subtle traps for the empath. It occurs when the boundaries between self and other become blurred, nebulous, and the emotions, thoughts, and sufferings of others begin to be experienced as if they were one's own. In this condition, identity fragments, the center is lost, and the empath becomes a reflection of the external world, a channel too open, lacking autonomy or internal support. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation, this path to wholeness, involves building solid and flexible internal boundaries that establish what is mine and what belongs to others. For the empath, this distinction takes on not only a psychological but also an energetic dimension. They must learn to feel what comes to them, embrace what serves them, and return what does not belong to them, like a river that receives rainwater but does not retain the current that flows by. The absence of this separation creates a life marked by constant exhaustion, a confusion of feelings, an inexplicable fatigue, and an invisible weight that corrodes the soul. The empath may feel overly sensitive or overwhelmed, as if carrying the entire world's pain within themselves, unable to rest or regain their vitality. This phenomenon manifests itself in various areas of life. In intimate relationships, where the empath takes on a role of tireless caregiver, sacrificing their own needs. In families, where they become the emotional regulator, maintaining the balance of others at the expense of their own. At work, absorbing the stress and conflict of colleagues without clear boundaries, becoming a silent victim of external pressure. The art of separation, therefore, is a subtle and profound exercise in self-love and mutual respect. It's learning to be present for the other without being absorbed by them, to offer companionship without carrying someone else's cross, to love without losing yourself. It's the ability to say, with clarity and compassion, "I feel you, but I am not you." It's not indifference, it's a deep awareness of one's own identity, a gesture of care for one's emotional autonomy. Practicing this separation requires immense courage and daily discipline. Empaths must dismantle long-held beliefs that have led them to believe their worth depends on bearing the suffering of others, that love means self-sacrifice to the point of exhaustion. It's an invitation to take responsibility for their own energy, with kindness and without guilt. It is in this sacred space of separation that empaths find true freedom, the freedom to be whole, to give authentically, and to preserve their emotional and psychological health. When you learn to separate your pain from that of others, you not only protect yourself but also offer a truer and more sustainable love, based on respect and conscious presence. Jung said that separation is the first step toward true union. Only when we are able to distinguish ourselves, to establish our boundaries, can we truly unite, creating healthy, balanced relationships where each person is responsible for themselves and what they bring. This process allows the empath to discover new ways of connecting with the world, less exhausting, deeper, and more pleasurable. They learn that they can be vulnerable without being violated, open without being invaded, sensitive without being crushed. This transformation changes their entire life experience, allowing them to live with greater lightness, authenticity, and personal power. The art of separation is, ultimately, the art of inhabiting one's own space with integrity, of being a vessel full of life and not a container overflowing with the pain of others. It is the step that transforms empathy into living wisdom, into compassion that heals, not consumes. On this path, the empath rediscovers the strength of their own presence, the value of authenticity, and the power of love that begins within, expanding to the other without losing themselves. They learn that true love means respecting their own limits and those of the other, that being together also means knowing when to be alone to recharge and find themselves. When an empath masters this art, they become a silent beacon, a point of balance in the chaos, a living example that it is possible to live deeply connected to others and to themselves, without losing themselves in the process. When empaths learn the art of separation, they also develop a skill that profoundly transforms their way of being in the world: the power of silence and authentic presence. Not an empty silence, an absence of expression, or a closure to the world, but a silence full of meaning, one that welcomes without invading, observes without judging, and loves without losing itself. This silence is the sacred pause where empaths find their strength, where their sensitivity balances with their essence, creating space for true connection with themselves and others. The sensitive empath knows that not all suffering needs to be verbalized, nor does every emotion need to be explained or discussed. Often, what people need most are not words, but a presence that simply exists, steady, calm, conscious, without rushing, without anxiety, without the urgency to fix or change the other person. This presence is a safe space where the soul can reveal itself, where silence is not burdensome, but welcoming and healing. It is in this place that the empath learns to listen not only to others, but to themselves, in their purest depths. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of silence for consciousness. For the empath, this silence becomes a necessary refuge, a moment of slowing down amidst the whirlwind of other people's and their own emotions. It is in silence that the empath finds their true voice, a voice that doesn't need to shout to be heard, that doesn't seek approval to exist, that expresses itself in authenticity and serenity. This voice is the center, the axis of the being that remains unshakable even in the face of emotional storms. Empaths often feel enormous pressure to be the healer, the counselor, the one who has the answers or solutions to others' pain. This pressure, sometimes silent, can lead to profound exhaustion, a loss of one's own energy and identity. However, authentic presence, grounded in conscious silence, offers something much deeper and truer: the space for others to be, feel, express themselves, and transform in their own time, without interference, without rushing, without pressure. Authentic presence requires no words, explanations, or justifications. It's an act of love that respects the other person's time and the empath's own inner time. It's recognizing that it's not always necessary to act, fix, or change. Sometimes, being present is the greatest gift one can offer. Being whole, present, fully available, even if in silence. For the empath, Cultivating this presence requires practice, self-awareness, and a lot of patience. It's learning to discern when to speak and when to listen, when to give and when to withdraw to preserve one's vital energy. This delicate balance is a daily exercise that strengthens authenticity and protects the empath's integrity, preventing burnout and loss of center. Furthermore, the power of silence is an indispensable tool against the emotional chaos and sensory overload that so often threaten to overwhelm empaths. In a noisy world filled with incessant stimuli, expectations, and demands, silence becomes an oasis where empaths can restore themselves, reconnect with their essence, and renew their strength. It is in this inner space that the mind finds clarity, the heart finds peace, and the soul finds rest. This practice brings benefits that extend beyond the emotional realm and are reflected in interpersonal relationships. Empaths who master silence and authentic presence become a source of calm and balance for those around them, creating environments of trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Their energy becomes a secure anchor amid emotional storms and conflicts, a living example of how to live with integrity and compassion. The empath's silence is also an invitation to the other, an invitation to allow themselves to be seen, heard, and accepted without masks or defenses. It is a call to authenticity, to genuine encounter, to the deep healing that arises from mutual recognition and acceptance. In this silent exchange, the empath and the other touch on their essence, beyond words and appearances. It's crucial to understand that this presence isn't passivity or resignation. On the contrary, it's a powerful force, a conscious act of love that requires courage, maturity, and discipline. Being present in the silence of another, especially when they're carrying pain, is one of the noblest and most difficult gestures one can offer. It requires a strong heart, a firm spirit, and a soul willing to welcome without losing oneself. Jung emphasized that the shadow can only be integrated when acknowledged. The empath's silence creates this acknowledgement, unhurriedly and without judgment, allowing the other person's shadow to emerge and be embraced. And in doing so, the empath also embraces their own shadow, in a circular movement of healing and mutual growth. Authentic presence is, therefore, the ultimate expression of conscious empathy, a love that respects individuality, preserves boundaries, and fosters true and healthy connection. It is the point where the empath stops being a victim of others' emotions and becomes a serene beacon of light and balance. In this space of silence and presence, the empath finds themselves in their entirety, allowing themselves to feel, love, and exist with integrity. It is from this deep and sacred place that genuine transformation is born, not only for themselves, but for all who are blessed to cross their path. After walking through the deep shadows, learning to separate yourself from the suffering of others, discovering the power of silence and authentic presence, you finally reach a rare and precious place, the state of inner alchemy. It is here that the empath ceases to be a mere passive recipient of emotions and transforms into a conscious vessel, capable of transmuting pain into light, chaos into serenity, confusion into wisdom. This transformation is the most profound of journeys, the path of those who have chosen not only to survive their sensitivity, but to flourish through it. The empath's true alchemy is not about escaping or denying pain, but about consciously embracing the wholeness of being, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, giving and protecting. Jung reminds us that we can change nothing until we accept it. Accepting the complexity of one's own heart, with all its contradictions, is the first step to becoming whole. It is in this acceptance that the empath finds their true power, the power to love deeply without losing themselves, to be present without being consumed. At this stage, empathy is no longer a burden, an obligation, or a trap. It is a sacred gift that pulsates in every gesture, every look, every silent word. The conscious empath has become a master of their own energy field, navigating emotions with grace, feeling pain without allowing it to define or dominate them. They know that their value lies not in the amount of suffering they endure, but in the quality of their presence, the clarity of their boundaries, and the authenticity of their love. For those of you who follow this journey, know that being here is a rare privilege. Few have the courage to descend so deeply, to face their shadows, to break old patterns and rebuild themselves. This is a journey of silent courage, of intimate transformation, that reverberates far beyond your own being, because your every step echoes in the world, offering a light to others also seeking balance and meaning. If this content touched your heart, if you feel like these words have opened a new door within you, I invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe so you don't miss the next reflections that delve deeper into this journey into the empath's soul. Each subscription is a step toward a community that values authenticity, care, and conscious growth. If this message resonated with you, please leave a like so it can reach more sensitive hearts thirsting for healing. The act of liking is more than a digital gesture. It's a form of support, a silent connection that strengthens our network of conscious empaths spread across the world. And more. Share your experience in the comments. Which part of this journey resonated most with you? What challenges do you still face on the path to conscious empathy? Your story could be the encouragement, inspiration, or light someone needs to take the next step. Here, your voice is valued, your process is respected, and your story matters. Always remember, being an empath is not a burden to carry, but a flame to light. A flame that illuminates your path and that of so many others. Every conscious choice you make to care for yourself and your limits is an act of inner revolution, a manifestation of love and authenticity. May this journey of self-discovery and healing be a living testament to the human capacity to transcend pain, to transform sensitivity into strength, and to become a beacon of light even in the darkest nights. You are a vessel of power and grace, an alchemist of the soul, a guardian of the inner light. Your presence here is no accident. It is a calling, a mission, a blessing. And with this awareness, move forward, confident and serene. The world needs your light, and you deserve to live the fullness of who you truly are.